Give it a couple more seconds. All right, you can start now.
Welcome to another edition of the Third Apron podcast. I am Sam Quinn, and I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm angry, not angry, annoyed. We went through another round yesterday of reports about the NBA being mad about tanking, and they we'll get into all of the reasons why this bothers me, but let's just start with the actual reporting from Shams Charania. The NBA is considering a number of possible fixes for the non-problem that is tanking, including changing the way that they protect picks, freezing the lottery standings on March 1st, and preventing teams from picking in the top four in consecutive years. Yossi, I know this is our podcast, but it is your platform first and foremost. Am I allowed to curse?
Yeah, we've cursed a little bit. I think we're allowed to curse, but I think the unspoken rule is just a little bit, not too much. No need to
Cool.
get too
Well,
crazy. I still want to get a sponsor eventually.
until we get a sponsor, this is so fucking stupid. I can't believe we do this every year. Every suggestion seems to make the problem worse. We get further and further away from what the NBA draft is actually meant to accomplish. Like, this is a very basic concept, but I think we've forgotten this. The entire point of the NBA draft is to serve as a balancing mechanism. Theoretically, the best teams have the best players. The worst teams have the worst players. Therefore, the draft exists to send the best incoming players to the worst teams so that they will no longer be the worst teams, thereby achieving the parity that Adam Silver seemingly wants in almost every other regard. And yet, tanking is apparently so distasteful to the NBA, to its stakeholders, and I guess some fans that we now every year, every few years, go through a new round of quote unquote solutions about how to fix a problem that isn't really a problem. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to go through these suggestions that the NBA is apparently considering, along with some of the other more common ideas that have been thrown around, and kind of talk through what we think the implications would be. How would this change the sport? What would the unintended consequences be? How much do we like these ideas? And ultimately, what would we do if we were put in charge of determining how the draft order is handled, how to fix tanking, blah, blah, blah. Yossi, are you as mad about this as I am?
Probably not. I wasn't gonna go that far. It definitely more so pissed me off. But I wasn't gonna get to. I thought we are gonna get to this in the end, just like our true feelings. But uh, I'll just say that if these are actual solutions that the owners think could actually quote unquote solve tanking and completely stop teams from in doing coordinated efforts, whether that's not maximizing their roster potential in the offseason to not playing certain guys when you get later into the season. I don't think there's any solve for that. There is something I think that could help alleviate that. I'm sure we'll get to that more to the end. But if they really think that these solutions are going to actually solve the issue they're hoping to solve, then I think they're out of touch, to be honest. So, yeah, let's get through it. Which one? There's like mainly three things. Which one do you want to start with?
Well, I'll start by saying this. There actually is one way that you could eliminate intentional tanking entirely, which is get rid of the NBA draft. I don't want to start there. I want to start with the ideas that the NBA had. But we will get through the implications of, okay, you want to eliminate tanking, therefore you have to eliminate any incentive whatsoever for losing. And the only way to do that is to get rid of the draft or to get rid of the reverse standings order component of the draft. We will get to that a little bit later. We want to start with these ideas that the NBA has put out there. So let's start with the first one, limiting the legal protections on draft picks that have been traded to only top 4 or top 14 or lower. So what exactly does this mean? Basically, you look at a situation like the 2023 Mavericks, where they had a top 10 protected pick that they owed the Knicks from the Kristaps Porzingis trade. They get to the end of the season. They are mathematically still in the play-in race, but functionally have been eliminated. So they decide we are going to intentionally lose our last two games in order to maximize our odds of keeping this top 10 protected pick, which eventually turned into Derek Lively. This solution would solve niche issues like this. very niche end of season, few game tank problems. Like the 2023 Mavericks might not have tanked as egregiously if that pick had been protected differently. Some of the other examples that have been cited by Shams in his story yesterday, I don't believe would be really addressed. He brings up the 76ers last year, who had a top 6 protected pick that they owed to Oklahoma City. They tanked like crazy. They wound up keeping it at number 3. If that pick had been top 4 protected instead of top 6 protected, they would have tanked just as hard. I was going to say they would have tanked harder. I don't know how it would have really been possible to do that, except for like maybe sitting Quentin Grimes even earlier. He's brought up the Jazz as another example that might have tanked differently. I think the Jazz would have just tanked harder. What goes through your mind when you hear this idea? Because I've got a few thoughts. This is one of the ones that I think would have the least impact, but let's start with this one. What do you think?
So use a better word than me, niche. I was gonna say like anecdotal. I think they're kind of in the same vein where it's so specific. You could count with the number. You could count with your hand the number of times that a team in the past 5 to 10 years bottomed out to preserve a pick. And the most recent ones are the Sixers last year, the Mavs in 2023. Neither of those teams intended to be bad at all. Things just went totally wrong. Injuries happen. Bad management, like some bad decisions from both teams led to them getting to January where you're ahead of the trade deadline and they didn't really the Mavs did the Kyrie trade, so they still tried to get better. You got to a point with these teams where they didn't plan on it, but it made sense to just bottom out in a little bit and keep your pick. So with that, I don't think you're really going to stop teams from, it's just a specific type of maneuver. You're not really going to stop teams overall from tanking. Just feels between this and the reporting from Shams on ESPN did cite the gambling stuff. Teams are more so players betting or having, spreading information about if they're not going to play too much. And so unders can hit. These are all March issues. So it feels like the NBA is kind of grasping at straws for like the justification to start going after these things. I don't think tackling these things is going to solve the issue at large. Now, I will want to ask you, let's say this does happen. What do you think? How do you think this would impact trades? Because that's all
my big issue. I think this would, the 2023 CBA has already made it so much harder to trade in so many ways. If you put this on top of it, it would only make it harder, especially at the deadline. Because something we do see at the deadline, I think the Bulls were an example of this last year with the Spurs, where they made a pick trade that was based on a targeted protection, where last year the Bulls were, I think the pick they owed San Antonio was top 8. It was something like that. And like the reason they traded for that pick back was because they were in that range. I think that would eliminate a lot of deadline trades where, like, say a team is in position to pick 10th, so it trades a top 8 protected pick, like maybe for a win now player, somebody who would help them in the future, but you can't risk that pick being, number 7. You don't want it to. I just don't think the NBA should be making it harder to trade when we can be honest about this. I mean, that's why this podcast exists. Trade rumors are a significant source of interest in the sport. I don't think you want to be in a position where a good player is stuck on a losing team and he can't get traded because the contender only wants to give up a top 8 protected pick. The other team would take a top 8 protected pick, but the rules say it has to be top 4 or top 14, and there's a divide between that protection. I think that would just make it way, way harder to trade.
In theory, I agree. The thing I would counter that is the uptick in unprotected picks being traded in the past 6 years. Maybe we should even do some research into it, see what is the percentage of traded first round picks since 2019 that are unprotected versus having some sort of protection, because now it's like without looking at the data, it seems pretty obvious that a majority of the first round picks, and I'd say like maybe if I had to say a ratio of maybe like 2/3 of the picks going out at least are unprotected. Teams are and when in negotiating, they're pushing for unprotected picks, and it seems like the teams that are trading these picks don't seem to care quite as much if about putting any protection. Um, so my feeling is it might help. It might curb a little bit of trading, but overall not too much, unless the trend starts to reverse. If teams get to a point in the next few years where they want to start adding more protections, then that could complicate trades and maybe reduce some of the bigger transactions. But I would say maybe by a small percentage. So I don't think it would impact it that much. But back to like the main issue at
Wait, can
hand.
I push
I
back on what you
don't
just
think this is
said
gonna
very
help.
quick?
Sure.
So I think the proportion of unprotected picks that are getting traded at a given time is directly proportional to how many stars are getting traded at a given time, because star trades will not just include one unprotected pick, they'll include 3, 4, 5. That obviously weighs significantly more than like the 4 or 5 role player trades that involve protected picks that it would take to balance that out. So if you're at a point in NBA history in which star trades are very, very common, then yes, unprotected picks are going to make up the majority of traded picks. I think, I don't know this for, it's complicated, but based on what we're seeing this year with all of the hesitance to trade for guys like Trae Young and John Morant and LaMelo Ball and Anthony Davis, I wonder if we're moving away from eras in which we have a ton of star trades, in which guys get traded for 4 or 5 first round picks because the contracts are so much more onerous. Therefore, role player trades are about to become much, much more significant, at which point the minutia of the protection involved in the pick therefore does become a lot more significant.
I think there's a good chance, regardless of whether they are successful in implementing some of these lottery reforms, that the market is about to correct itself. I don't think we're already starting to see the amount of full draft 3, 4 first round pick plus trades. The amount of those happening is going down now. I feel like we're going to start to see more of the types of trades from a decade ago where like when Kyrie Irving got traded to the Celtics, it was for one really good first round pick, some pretty good players, like 2 first round picks worth of value. There's some other trades I'm not really thinking of, like the Paul George to OKC trade, same kind of thing. Like it's not
That's
like
a very instructive one, yes.
yeah, that's like you can call it at the time Oladipo, Sabonis, they are each worth like a pretty good first round pick at the time. So you can look at it as that way, where instead of players going for 3, 4 round picks, it's more like 1 to 2. I feel like that's where it's going, especially because now a lot of teams don't have a lot of picks to trade, where you could see a team like potentially Minnesota maybe get a really good player for a cheap price just because they don't have anything to trade. Um, but yeah, anything else on this, or should we move on with
The
the next thing?
last thing I just want to say is I do think like we could honestly do a whole podcast about the various Paul George related transactions, because each of them are so fascinating in their own way. Like forget about the SGA trade for a moment. That's the obvious one. I think that Paul George trade might like turn into a template for star trades in the future, where what Indiana did, what at the time we thought, oh, he's just going to go to the Lakers because that's where he wants to go. What the Pacers did in that trade was they basically said, we now have a license to go pluck 1 or 2 interesting young players that we like off of another team. So who are we organizationally higher on than the rest of the league? And the names they came up with were Sabonis and Oladipo. And when that trade happened, it was kind of mocked. Like, how could they trade Paul George for so little? Both of those guys turned into all-stars. Obviously, Oladipo's health prevented him from remaining one. But I do think that's something that as pick trades become harder and harder to make, we might see more and more GMs say, let's say like Giannis as an example for the Bucks. Maybe the Bucks look around and say, the teams that Giannis wants to go to aren't going to make us optimal offers. Let's look around the league and say, what third year player or second year player that hasn't broken out yet do we really like organizationally that we can go target like the Pacers did with Sabonis and Oladipo? I just think that's a trend worth watching, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Next one. Freezing the standings on March 1st. I think there is some merit to this. And the example that I'll give is last year on February 7th, Daryl Morey gave a quote where he said that if you squint, you can still see a championship team here. At that point, the 76ers were 20-30. I don't remember what they exactly finished as. I know they closed the year on a 4-21 stretch. So there are some teams that do very, very aggressively tank at around that point on the calendar. Utah is obviously another example of this. 2023 and 2024, they make lose now trades at the deadline after starting out hot, and they immediately get much, much worse. I think the obvious counter to this is that if you are a team that is at all incentivized to tank, like say the Utah Jazz and Philadelphia 76ers were, because they owed these protected picks, they'd probably just start to tank earlier. So I don't know how much that really accomplishes. Way at the end, I'm going to circle back to this because I want to tie it into another idea that I have. But explain to me, like, do you agree that this would just lead to earlier and earlier tanking?
I don't know about so much if it's going to get teams to be more aggressive on that early on, but it's definitely not going to get them to go the other way either. Because when you look at teams like the Wizards, Nets, and Jazz, it's right now these teams aren't exactly trying to lose. Like this, there's very few teams you could really point to in the past. Like I'm talking about like Sixers from 10 years ago, process Sixers, teams that were like actively doing everything in their power to lose every single game possible. That's not really happening in the beginning of the season. Like you've got the Nets and the Jazz right now. They're earnestly trying to win games. I think the Wizards are trying their best too.
The Jazz aren't right now. Hang on. Have you seen some of these lineups the Jazz have been putting out lately? Like the Jazz they understand the assignment right now. They started out hot, but they've moved in that direction.
Okay. But like the Nets, they're doing a little well right now. The Pelicans don't have their pick, but so that doesn't really count because they're going to want to try no matter what this year. So, but generally speaking, like teams don't turn it up until March. That's when you get to teams have already been eliminated. Now you're really trying to position yourselves. So yeah, I would say that if you're going to do this cutoff date for lottery positioning, then most likely you are going to get some teams to try, like at the outset, just try everything they can to lose a little bit more games, whether that means not exactly like putting lineups, like ridiculous lineups. Like I think it's a problem if like you're gonna start like, and this isn't like the biggest exaggeration for him, but like let's say you start like a big man as your point guard, like you don't want to play any point guards. Okay, that's an easy recipe to lose games.
Like
but I'm pretty sure. No. Yeah, I think they were actually trying to do something.
I know. It's funny. It's funny that you say that as a tanking idea, and somebody did that trying to win.
Yeah, well, because like the Clippers famously did that in a game. They were like playing, I forgot, I think Daniel Oturu
versus Poku, the greatest tank game of all time.
And they weren't even trying to like, wasn't for lottery position. They were
ducking the Lakers.
Yeah. So you could do stuff like that, but I would imagine if you're going to play like lineups that are just completely like not integral to the spirit of the game, I would imagine the league would somehow try to get involved. So you're going to try to do things mainly to put the roster in a position to lose games early on. The easiest way for me is reduce the amount of playmakers you have. That's what I thought the Nets would be, like the worst team in the league. Now they're not quite that, but they... Like you could do a couple things now, and I think that's what's like. You already got teams like the Nets, and as an example, I guess they got better, but not totally intentionally. But when you look at what they did, they had 50 million or so in cap space. They didn't use any of the cap space to try to get better, even though they unintentionally did again with the Porter Jr. trade. Like you're not going to get teams with cap flexibility and trade assets a lot of extra draft picks to pivot away from whatever timeline they're on to try their best. You're not going. This won't change teams from like alter their path from doing that. I think.
So I think there's a very cynical motivation here that we have to mention. And I think this relates to the reason we're having this conversation, really, why this is an issue that the NBA cares about, which is TV ratings and buying tickets and just general revenue streams. But more than anything, I think the reason this idea appeals to the league is that something tanking teams will very frequently do is shut down their best players in the middle of the season due to quote unquote injury, right? I'm not saying the injuries are fake. I am saying they are injuries that guys probably could come back from if they had a motivation to win, but their team is playing for lottery balls. So an injury that might keep you out for 1 month keeps you out for 3 months or whatever, something like that. I think the appeal for the league of this freezing the lottery standings on March 1st is that you would then magically start to see a lot of injured stars coming back on March 2nd and on March 3rd and so forth, with the idea for the league that now these stars will be able to play in nationally televised games that you've scheduled in advance. I think that's why this appeals. I think the counter to that is that taking away an incentive to lose does not magically create an incentive to win. Say you are a losing team. Even if the lottery standings are frozen on March 1st, if you have a guy who was injured and maybe could come back, but you have nothing to gain by winning games, I think most teams would still keep the guy out to prevent injury because this season is over. We're thinking about next season. Why risk further injury for games that don't matter? So I think that's part of what the NBA is thinking here. I just want to point out that I don't think that's how it would actually play out. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's fair. And so there's like a couple teams that came to mind with what you're describing. Like there's the Mavs from 2 years ago, but that was like so late into the season. And
It's two
I think
games.
and Kyrie was already out for a while. I remember he suffered a really bad, like I think ankle injury. So they were already on the downturn. Obviously the Sixers last year, whether a lot of these guys were as injured as maybe like there were a lot of injuries. I think there's definitely truth to it, but maybe more down the stretch when they started shutting down guys. I could see the NBA getting upset about that. Obviously, the Blazers from 2 years ago and even the years before, they shut down a lot of players, and now that's becoming the subject of the Billups investigation. So I I think when you step back though, these teams just weren't that good. Like how many more, let's say there were some exaggerated injuries. How many more games were these teams really going to win? I don't think they were going to win anything. Like if we're talking about going from being, you know, maybe the second or third worst team, like in that bottom tier, to maybe like a tier slightly above 5 to 6 or 7, like who's going to remember that? How is that so great for the league? So no, I'm with you on that. I do want to this isn't a fix, but just like a small patch that maybe could improve March basketball by like 10-15%. Can you guess what it would be?
No, just throw it out.
I'm surprised that the NBA hasn't said anything about adding a second NBA Cup or at least moving the NBA Cup from November, December to March. I think that is a pretty quick way to make March basketball a little more meaningful. It's not gonna completely change everything. It's not gonna solve all the issues, but just a little. I feel like that's just a quick layup they could do to get teams a little more motivated. Maybe it could somehow be tied into lottery odds. Like, what if you group all the lottery teams together and and that's like part of what they get a little more odds. Like, and then it's more, instead of being a fixed system, it's like kind of points based. That's just like a small patch. I would say it might be worth the NBA exploring.
So
it's not gonna. It's really not gonna solve like the bigger picture, but just I feel like that's a layup.
I don't think you could introduce a second NBA Cup because it would devalue the first NBA Cup. And I don't think you could only have the NBA Cup in March because the playoffs are right after that in April. So it would kind of just feel like a warm up for the playoffs instead of its own event. It's an interesting idea, but I think there are just too many holes to be poked in that. Something that does get talked about a fair bit is some version of like a lottery tournament. But the reason I dislike that is that we've now seen 2 years in a row teams in the play-in tournament winning the lottery. I don't want the best non-playoff teams getting the best young players because that just traps the worst teams at the bottom. So I don't think though that concept really helps anybody, although it would be very entertaining, especially if you put enough money in front of the players. Like there's this notion that players won't want to play to help their team draft their replacement. I think if you offer them a big enough cash prize, they would play hard. And it'd be
Yeah.
funny if the owners specifically could decide how much they're willing to be worth. Like, imagine if Steve Ballmer was in the lottery and he had no cap. He could literally just tell his players, I will give each of you $100 million if you get me the number one pick. I think that would be hilarious. It's totally impractical, but I think that
Well,
would be a kind of fun thing to do.
well, let me ask you: do you think it'd be better to move the cup to March then,
No,
instead of
I don't
adding a
think so.
second cup?
I think the cup should open the season. I think the way it should work is it should be a single elimination tournament where after every round there would be a losers bracket. And so you would keep going and going. Every team would play 5 games. The 5 games would all count towards the regular season. But if you did it by single elimination with losers brackets, you would then have every team place. Like there would be a team finishing in first and second and third specifically, etc. You'd have to go to 32 teams. But the way this would work would be you'd have teams placed between 1 and 32, and then you could eliminate tiebreakers at the end of the season and just use your NBA Cup placement as the universal tiebreaker, which I think would be very, very cool. You start the season with it, you have a lot of hype, you make it feel like March Madness with the single elimination. That's what I would do. Maybe they'll get there with when they eventually expand if they do, but I don't think March really makes sense for the NBA Cup just because at that point it just feels like a watered down version of the playoffs. Like I think the playoffs need to be kind of separate from the cup. If the cup is going to stand on its own, it has to be at a different point of the calendar. So the next one, you can't pick in the top 4 in consecutive drafts. I have a couple of big problems with this. First of all, it treats all top 4 picks as if they're made equal. Picking number 1 and picking number 4 historically, the gap has been absolutely enormous. Now, I know people will chime in and say like, "Well, actually the number 3 pick tends to produce stars that almost blah blah blah." Like, no, that's not really how this works. There have been like 6 or 7 historically awesome number 3 picks. The number 2 pick almost has historically been cursed. Having the number 1 pick and having any other pick in NBA history, there's just an enormous statistical difference. So first of all, I think if you're doing something like this, you'd have to like range it. So if you pick number 1, you can't pick anywhere in the top 4 next year. If you pick number 2, you can't pick anywhere in the top 3. If you pick number 3, then you can't pick number 1 or number 2. And if you pick number 4, then you can't pick number 1 overall. That's one issue here. The second issue is that you may be removing incentive to tank from the absolute worst teams in the NBA, but those teams are probably bad anyway, right? Like last year's top 3 of Dallas, San Antonio, Philly, that was an outlier. For the most part, your top 4 is mostly going to be teams like Utah and Charlotte and Washington and Brooklyn, teams that are already at the bottom of the standings. Those teams are going to be bad either way. Removing the incentive probably isn't going to rush them. But you know what doing this would do? It would incentivize teams in that 5 to 8 range to tank even harder because now they have a much clearer path into the top 4. And the real winner here would be gap year teams. Imagine a world in which Indiana just looked at this and said, wait a second, we can, without Tyrese Halliburton, we have nothing to play for anyway. We can sneak into the top 4 so easily, then get Halliburton back and not face any consequences because next year Halliburton's going to be healthy and we're not going to be picking in the top 4 anyway. Like in that world, Boston might have been motivated to play for a top 4 pick. And this really fun, I think right now, number 3 seed season for Boston, in which Jaylen Brown is playing at an all NBA level and they're talking about being buyers at the deadline, That would disappear in this world, at least in my opinion. You agree with that?
I agree. I think that I think out of all the things they propose, this is the least indefensible. And that's mainly because I just think it's not gonna have any effect on the system at all. I don't think it's going to really solve tackle what they're going for. And I don't really think it really have that many unintended consequences either. Because if you're a team, like let's just say you're the Wizards, you're on this timeline no matter what. Let's say it's like a 3-year timeline. Okay, so you have a shot at getting a top 4 pick in year 1, but then not in year 2, but then again in year 3. Guess what the Wizards just went through? They got the number 2 pick in 2024. They dropped the 5 last year. We'll see what happens this year. Like, no teams, there's always like one team that gets so lucky in a quick stretch of years, like the Spurs in recent years, the Cavs a decade ago getting consecutive number 1 picks, the Lakers late, between 2015, 2017, getting 3 second round picks in a row. Like, those are anomalies. They happen. But for the average team, you're not picking top 4 that frequently. The Jazz have only picked 5th once, although they hadn't bottomed out hard enough. I had a list of teams. The Hornets, I think they only went as high as 2nd. Then they went out to like 8th in 2024. Then they just selected 4th. Like, teams are already kind of doing that. Am I wrong? Like, they're already kind of like alternating in this with the lottery system as is. So I just don't think this is doing anything. I think it's already happening.
So there are a couple of ideas here that I do kind of like. I do think with how far out teams scout, I think something interesting that could happen here would be, say you have Victor Wembanyama becoming available in 2023, and in 2022 that he's coming. That might force you to straighten up and fly right in 2022 because you don't want to be out of the running for Wemby in 2023. Meanwhile, there are years like 2024 where everybody knows the draft class is bad. Maybe teams would try to win in 2024 so as not to be stuck in that bad one with Cooper Flag coming in 2025. Like, there might be a little bit of strategic winning on that front. The other thing that this could do is at least disperse top picks, because what keeps happening over and over and over again when a top prospect comes into the draft, they keep going to the West. Now, a lot of that is not fixable. That's just the lottery being the lottery. I think if you maybe instituted a system closer to the one that I suggested, where like the pick that you're prevented from getting in the next year is directly tied to the one you got this year, maybe you could balance things out a little bit more and send more top picks to the East. But mostly I do agree with you. Again, I do think there's some merit to this idea. I just think it needs to be done in concert with a few other things for it to actually accomplish anything. I ultimately do think you're right. This is the least impactful. Anything else you want to say on this one before we move on to the others?
Yeah, this one seems like it also might be the most complicated out of the other solutions to try to figure out, because okay, so if you're locking out certain teams from getting into the top 4, then how does the rest of the lottery shake out? Is there a lottery for that? Because how then are you going to stop those teams from bottoming out anyway? Okay, we can't get the first pick, but you know what? I'm going to try my best to get the 5th pick. That's how I'm looking at it. Like, if you're on this rebuilding timeline, you're going to want to get the best pick possible no matter what.
I mostly do agree with you. And I have another question that I want to bring up, but I think it's a more solvable one. I guess what you would do is you would hold the lottery drawing as normal. And like, say the team that picked number 4 last year gets the number 1 pick. You would just ignore it and say, like, we're starting over, doing it again. And you would keep going until an eligible team got picked. And then, after the top 4 teams are just ordered by their record. So then the team that originally like was ineligible but got number 1 would just slot in where it actually was by record. So I guess that's how you do it. The other thing you would have to figure out, what happens if a team trades an unprotected pick but picks number 1 the year before, or picks number 4, could their own pick that has been traded fall in the top 4 again the next year? I think it would have to. You'd have to say the answer is yes. But I wonder if that would kind of like cause some problems where like some years there are 2 teams that are ineligible from the lottery drawing, and other years there are 4 because they're outstanding picks via trade. Does that change the lottery mechanism at all? We don't know. We don't know what the system would be. But I think that could range some problems. Like, you agree, right? That's what they would say. Like, if your pick was ineligible, it would only be ineligible if you had it. But if you trade it, it's fair game for the other team to be in the top 4 again.
Yeah, if there's gonna be trades involved, you can't really control that after.
Yeah.
You gotta let the team have the pick then.
Okay. So next one. This is it's been more than a decade since this one became public. I think Zach Lowe first shared it, but the idea came from Mike Zarin, who I don't know what his title is, but he's been the number 2 with the Celtics forever. The concept is called the wheel. Essentially, what it would do is it would create a rotation of draft picks that would last 30 years, where in a 30-year span, all 30 teams would have each pick between number 1 and number 30 exactly once. It would be a fixed order. So, like, I don't remember what the order would be exactly, but it would be like you pick number 1, and then the next year you pick number 30, and then the next year you pick number 15, and the next year you pick number 8, and then so on and so forth in whatever balancing mechanism that they determined. That's how it would go, and everybody would rotate in a fixed order. There are a couple issues here. There's a very, very obvious one, which is imagine the NBA champion then gets the number 1 pick. You don't have to imagine because it might happen for the Thunder this year, but I don't think there was a world in which, outside of a trade in which it's unavoidable, you would have wanted, say, the 2017 Warriors to have Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant and then also get the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. I think that would have been potentially kind of catastrophic. Number 2, you would be locking yourself into this system for 30 years. You can't do it for 5 years, determine that you dislike it, and then abandon the concept, because there would be 5 teams that got number 1 picks and 25 that didn't, and it would be very unfair to them if you scrap this plan in the middle. Speaking of how rigid this system would be, how would you account for expansion? You couldn't start this and then add teams in the middle. You'd have to start the process all over again. But again, that would be unfair to the teams that didn't have the good picks early on. So I think this is mostly impractical. Were you ever a fan of the wheel?
I think it's just a cool, a cool theory.
Thought experiment.
Like, I like the mechanism. That's as far as I'd go. I think it's a pretty cool concept. I don't think it's viable though.
You know what I actually do find really interesting about this? You'd have to change the 7-year rule where you can only trade draft picks 7 years out. But because every team knows exactly where they'll pick in every year, you could trade specific picks, right? Like, you could say, like, Giannis Antetokounmpo is worth a number 1 pick, and your number 1 pick is 11 years away. It doesn't matter. We're trading it for Giannis. I think that could like really make trades a lot more interesting if you knew exactly which picks you were trading. But of course, the reverse of that is that the number 1 pick is not worth the same in every draft. Some years it's Victor Wembanyama, some years it's Zachary Risichet, and I think that's the other problem with the wheel. Is imagine like you've been waiting 25 years for your number 1 pick. It's been preordained by the wheel for 2.5 decades. And it comes up and it's the Zachary Risichet year. And just too bad. You got unlucky. I think that's a major problem. And I think that's something that we should just kind of discuss here. I have a quote from Adam Silver when he was talking about the CBA, but I think it does apply to lottery stuff as well. We set out to create a system that allowed for more competition around the league. The goal being to have 30 teams all in the position, if well managed, to compete for championships. This quote is very, very telling to me because from a CBA standpoint, I think they are moving in that direction. It's just strange to me that smart management is so important to them from a CBA standpoint, yet they're so willing to concede to luck when it comes to the lottery, right? Like, Getting the number one pick does not mean that you're well managed. It means that you won the lottery. I would argue that luck is a bigger factor in building a successful NBA team than wise management. Now, that is not to say that lucky teams are inherently dumb. I think the obvious example here is San Antonio. The Spurs are a very well run team. If you look at all of the moves they've made independent of their drafting, they do the right stuff. They also got top 4 picks in 3 consecutive drafts, including the most valuable number 1 overall pick since LeBron James entered the league. The San Antonio Spurs are undeniably historically lucky. They are also well run, but I think there are similarly well run teams that will have a very hard time competing with the Spurs just because they aren't as lucky. I really don't think you should be building a system that rewards luck this much, which brings us to the final thing that I think we should talk about today. Something that gets thrown around quite a bit. What if we just eliminated the NBA draft altogether? Teams would have no incentive to tank because there would be no benefit. You wouldn't get a high draft pick because high draft picks wouldn't exist. Couple of problems here that I want to start with. Number one, you'd have to get rid of the rookie scale. If it's a truly free market and players are free to sign wherever they want, you can't say the number one pick is capped at a certain salary because that would eliminate, like the bidding of it, right? That wouldn't be a free market. Owners aren't going to want that because they don't want to pay rookies fair market value because of the risk. They've never seen them play in the NBA. The players union also wouldn't want that because the players union is comprised of veterans who are actually in the NBA, not rookies who aren't there yet. Veterans want the money in that's assigned via the CBA to go to them. They don't want it to go to rookies. So the union would vote against this, I think. The other big issue, and look, I know people I know this is kind of distasteful to say, this would be the greatest thing that has ever happened to big markets. What would happen is that Nike would effectively decide where every top prospect went. And guess where Nike is sending players? To New York, to Los Angeles, maybe to Chicago, maybe to Miami. The shoe companies do not have a salary cap. They can spend as much money as they want to get a player, and the best players are most valuable to the shoe companies when they are in the biggest cities. So what would happen if you eliminated the NBA draft? Nike would send Victor Wembanyama to the Lakers. They would send Cooper Flagg to the Knicks. And you would be giving those teams such an inherent advantage that smart management would fly out the window. Like, you can find Jokic at number 41 or that salary free agent equivalent. Awesome. You're so smart. Great. You're playing against the Lakers team that has 3 of the top 12 players all getting funded by Nike. So that's why I think that wouldn't work. What do you think about that?
I can't really even fathom the idea of not having a draft. It's just such an institution in American sports and all the leagues. I wouldn't rule out if maybe 40, 50 years from now, there is no more draft and things have evolved to a way where it is like maybe, I don't know, soccer where you can, international soccer, you just go where the money is. Um, this is like just, this one is just like so far away from the future. Uh, it'll take a while till we even get there.
Do we want European soccer? I know Adam Silver in some ways seems to. I would argue the way he's managed the CBA suggests that financially he doesn't. Look at what's happening in baseball, where the Dodgers have such an unfair advantage over every other team. The Mets, the Yankees, like a few of these teams are spending so much more money. I don't think we want that in the NBA. I do broadly agree with what Adam Silver said, how we want a world in which, if well managed, all 30 teams have a fair chance to compete for the title. I just don't think American sports fans want European soccer. And the reason I think that is that every major American professional sport has some version of a reverse standings order draft. The exact mechanism changes. Other leagues have adopted lotteries that are slightly different from the NBA's, but they all do have a draft. The worst teams, broadly speaking, have the best access to the incoming young talent. So I don't think we want anything like European soccer, where the Lakers and the Knicks could just identify every top prospect at 14, bring them into their academy and say, you're going to be with us forever. That doesn't sound fun to me. It would kill trading, right? Like, because you wouldn't have draft picks to trade. And again, trade rumors are a pretty important part of the NBA. A lot of the drama comes from trade rumors. I just think this is ridiculous. And like, when people moralize over this and they say, oh, it's so unfair. Like, imagine if when you graduated from college, some company in your industry that's in like some city you don't want to live into could draft you and you could be forced to move there. Why do you have to do that in sports if you don't have to do that in any other job? Well, the reason that that exists in sports is because they're making millions of dollars to play this game. And that's what the money's for, right? That's why you're allowed to be traded. That's why you're allowed to be drafted. The CBA exists in such a way that players make certain concessions in order to maximize their earning power. If every NBA player as a union got together and said, we are sick of drafting, we are sick of trading, whatever it is, we want to eliminate this practice altogether, they could theoretically go to owners and say, we are tired of trades. We want to get rid of trades. The owners would shoot back and say, like, okay, what percentage of BRI are you willing to give up to do that? We will gladly give you an NBA with no trades if instead of 49 to 51% of basketball related income, you are now getting 30% or whatever it is. The players have not chosen to pursue this because they would rather maximize their earnings. So that's why you have a draft. That's why like the moralizing over this doesn't make any sense. I know it's unusual. It makes sense in this specific industry where parity is a very important part of the business model. Anything else here? Or do you want to move on to our solutions?
Let's move on to solutions.
I'm going to clear the floor for you here because I know you have something you want to talk about. So, you know what? I am camped out in the strong side corner, ready to, catch shoot a wide open three if you want to hit me on the pass. Otherwise, it is all you.
So I've got one big solution, and I think this is something that can solve a lot of major issues in the NBA because the NBA, they have like 5 main issues right now. You've got, right now, I think, in my opinion, the biggest one is soft tissue injuries, which leads to a lot of games missed. I think that's becoming probably the forefront issue in the league right now. Then in no particular order, you've got officiating, quote unquote tanking, and then ratings, and then more recently, the gambling stuff. But I'm going to set that aside because in my opinion, those top 4 issues are all connected in a way. And I think that they can all be addressed if the NBA and the players actually agree to do one thing that a lot of other people have floated and neither side will ever seriously consider it in any time soon, and that is shortening the season. And I think the owners in the process, I'm guessing it's the owners, and I say owners because I'm guessing they're the ones who are coming up with these solutions. Correct me if I'm wrong. But
so it's owners and they're getting pitches from GMs and from agents as well, apparently.
So it seems like in this process, they stumbled upon the idea of shortening the season as the solution of things and just completely sidestepped it. And what really showed their hand to me is that 60 game demarcation. I mean, the March 1st demarcation, because that is when most teams will have played their 60 games, 60th game of the season. To me, that kind of shows that is what the regular season should be, because I think you're reducing the season by 25%. You're going to significantly reduce the amount of soft tissue injuries. You reduce injuries, you're going to make games more meaningful. You're going to help with ratings there. You make games more meaningful, you're going to reduce. I don't think you're going to completely eliminate tanking, but you're going to really curb it. Because now it's going to be much harder to bottom out. I would guess that by making the season shorter, less load for the officials, maybe they can perform a little better. And then I guess gambling in a way is kind of related because a lot of the incidents that have come out in recent years, whether that's Jonte Porter, Blazers, Chauncey Billups, those were Terry Rozier. I believe all of those were March related games, like late season games. So if you're gonna have less of this March meaningless basketball, then maybe you could help eliminate players from doing that too. But I think for the most part, now that players are and coaches are getting caught, I think that's gonna solve itself. So yeah, I think that's really like how the NBA could solve a lot of its issues, and not completely solve, but at least alleviate a lot of their issues. And in this case, with this issue that they think is a major issue, that's tanking teams, not enough parity. Ultimately, that's the one issue of these I think is going to solve the least, because deep down, I don't think the NBA will ever fix tanking. And we saw in 2019, they implemented the first lottery reform. They evened out the odds, and then in 2020 they added the play-in tournament. And for like a couple of years, it seemed like the NBA solved tanking. You had very few teams truly bottom out the way they were. And then Victor Wembanyama came in 2023, and teams started regretting that they didn't bottom out hard enough. And now here we are back again. Teams are trying to get the best players in the league, because that's what it takes to win a championship. You need the absolute best players, and you need to have a chance. You want to maximize your chances at hopefully getting one of these guys. So as long as the game is structured in a way where to have a chance at winning a championship, you need one of the top 5 guys, you're always going to have teams positioning themselves for just the opportunity to maybe get that guy.
You know what's interesting? I have a lot of things I want to say, but you bring up an interesting point right at the end about needing a top 5 player to win a championship. There is a part of me that thinks that in this new CBA world, that might not be the case anymore, where maybe you could win a championship having 6 or 7 really, really good players instead of stacking 235% maxes. I say that in theory, because in practice, the Spurs and Thunder accumulated so much young talent that it's kind of irrelevant, right? Like, there's no more theory to this. They have everything they need to not only be a 60, 65, 70 win contender every year, but they've accumulated all this extra draft capital to effectively replenish it and not face any of the consequences of the CBA. So that idea flies totally out the window. So this is something I think we've talked about in private. I think what the NBA was trying to do was to create parity through the CBA. What it actually did was it allowed the Thunder and Spurs to build dynasties, and then really weakened any other team's ability to build a team to challenge them, right? Like, they're going to have an easier time staying at the top because of these rules that are going to hurt other teams more than they're going to hurt them. I want to talk about shortening the season, though, because I do think there is a very simple math to this that the NBA kind of ignores whenever they say, like, oh, like, we actually refute the data that says playing fewer games would lead to fewer injuries. You want to know how I know that playing 60 games would lead to fewer injuries than playing 82 games? Because if you play 82 basketball games, you have 82 chances to get injured. If you play 60 basketball games, you have 60 chances to get injured, right? And it's not as though you get injured once and you miss one game. Every opportunity to get injured could potentially hold you out for the entire season. So if we remove opportunities to get injured, independent of the soft tissue component of this, where like maybe rest is very important to that, like maybe having more rest would make those injuries less likely. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I will say that you can't get hurt if you're not playing basketball. It's kind of common sense. So play less basketball, fewer opportunities to get hurt. And the regular season injuries to me are kind of whatever. It's just a dog days thing. The playoff injuries are what really matter, because it feels like every year now, the champion is determined by which team is healthiest at the end of the year. We just lost Game 7 of the NBA Finals to a blown calf, right? Or a blown Achilles, excuse me. I can't remember the last time we made it through a postseason in which some significant matchup series, whatever, was not substantially affected by an injury. The goal needs to be getting to the playoffs and having your marquee games where both teams are as close to full strength as possible. Those are the games that matter. Those are the games that we remember. The officiating thing you bring up, playing fewer games. You want to know how I know that playing fewer games would help officiating? Because you need fewer officials to do fewer games, right? You could get rid of your worst performing officials and have your best officials being in more games. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory to me. So I mostly agree with you on all counts. I think the NBA should shorten the season. I think what we learned during the bubble is that the local TV deals, aside from the greed of owners and the greed of players and all that, like, that's its own thing. The big problem that we have in an immediate short-term sense is that the local TV deals make it very, very hard to cut the number of games. That's why so many teams went to the bubble, because you have to reach a certain threshold, which I believe is 70 games, in order to meet the standard of your local TV deal. Now, something that's going on that I think casual fans might not be aware of right now, FanDuel Sports Network, one of the RSN distributors, I don't know what the exact terminology is, one of the channels basically that has a lot of these local TV deals is in the process of going under. And there's a lot of talk about what's going to happen. Would the league just put those teams' games on League Pass? There's been some talk, some rumors, I don't know how official or serious, that maybe moving forward, the NBA is going to try to bundle all of the local TV rights and sell it to one specific place, like one League Pass package that would supplant local TV deals. I think this makes a lot of sense. I also think you would have a very, very hard time getting the Lakers and the Knicks to agree to this. The Lakers make $150 million a year on their local TV deal. Most teams make substantially less. The Knicks obviously have MSG and Gotham Sports Plus, whatever it is. So whatever that's called, I think it's Gotham Sports Plus. And the Knicks don't like cooperating with the NBA on anything. James Dolan has made it very clear that he does not like when all 30 teams are basically treated as one pot. He thinks, oh, the valuable big market teams should be treated better, like we should be able to make more money, ignoring the fact that his poor management of the Knicks for so long has probably cost the other owners billions of dollars, but that's another conversation. They would never agree to that. But if you could get all of the local TV rights into one pot and you could change the way you negotiate the specifics of those contracts, maybe you could arrange a system where you lower the number of games. The bigger issue here is, frankly, greed. It's that simple. The owners don't want to give up games because giving up games equals less revenue. For the owners, you could argue that that makes sense because you are making each game more valuable. You can sell tickets for more. You can sell local TV rights for more. You're basically saying we're decreasing supply, therefore we are increasing demand. For owners, the long-term proposition makes sense because what you're basically saying is this is going to hurt us in the short term. It's going to help us in the long term. Players can't think about the long term. Most players are only in the NBA for a short amount of time. They don't want a 5-year, window where salaries are going down because you're playing fewer games. I think the owners would have to come up with some way to fund this on the player end so that they would be they'd be okay with it. I would argue for players, if you're playing fewer games, you'll stay healthier, you'll be able to play longer. This will be a net benefit for you. I don't think the player, the journeyman that's trying to get a minimum contract, wants to give up an extra $300,000-$400,000 a year for the long-term health of the league because they only have a few years to make those extra couple thousand dollars. It means everything to them to make as much money as humanly possible. I don't think the players would ever agree, but we are in agreement that would be the fix, or it'd be one of the fixes.
It would solve a lot of stuff. Yeah, it would improve a lot of things. And like I said, I think it would improve the tanking bottoming out issue the least because deep down teams are always going to position themselves for the best draft odds if they want it. That as long as that incentive is still there, you're never going to solve the underlying issue that motivates teams to do this, but it would help. I think it would definitely help a lot. Probably be the I would say it'd be like on par with the first lottery reform and adding the play-in tournament. Like I do think that was pretty meaningful in curbing tanking. But again, like you're gonna curb it. You're not gonna solve it. As long as there's a draft, you're never gonna solve it.
Well, this brings up what my solution here would be. I am going to adapt two of the things that the NBA suggested, which is freezing the standings on March 1st, which I actually think does make some sense because I think we don't talk enough about how damaging the gap year concept theoretically can be. Imagine if the Warriors had ended up with Anthony Edwards. That would have been bad for the league. If the Warriors could have just had one bad year and then turned that into another 15 years of franchise player, like that would be bad. I karmically am rooting for the Pacers to get the number one pick because after what happened to Halliburton, I just think like that fan base deserves it. But I don't think you want a team in the NBA Finals getting the number one pick or getting a top pick. So I think the idea of freezing the standings on March 1st would at least make it harder for the teams that like came into the year expecting to be good or then got killed by injuries to get a top pick. That I want to reward the actual, or not reward. I want to give the top prospects to the teams that are actually bad, not the teams that are like briefly bad due to circumstances. So I want to limit the number of teams that can decide midstream that they're going to tank. And I think freezing the standings on March 1st can help on that regard. I'm also going to adapt the preventing teams from picking in the top 4 in consecutive years. I'm going to do what I suggested earlier. If you pick number 1, you can't pick in the top 4 in the next year. If you pick number 2, you can't pick in the top 3 in the next year. If you pick number 3, you can't pick top 2. And if you pick number 4, you can't pick number 1. So basically, if you get a high draft pick one year, you, depending on how high that pick is, you can't get a similarly high pick in the next year. I know you're never going to get rid of tanking altogether. I think the most the NBA can aspire towards is to limit the multi-year tanks. But here's where my biggest change is going to come in. In addition to these changes, I am eliminating the NBA draft lottery. My view on this is that teams, or the league should say, teams, do what you need to do for 1 year. If you need to go whole hog and absolutely suck, that's fine. But we expect you to try to win after that. We don't want these situations where you're spending 3, 4, 5 years at the bottom. We want teams at the bottom to recover as quickly as humanly possible and then get out of the bottom of the draft or the top of the draft. Therefore, we're getting rid of the lottery. If you are the worst team, you get the number 1 pick. You're not going to get a top 4 pick next year, but you can do this for 1 year, get that so-called top 10 player that everybody knows that you need, but then we expect you to move on. What do you think of that concept?
In general, I'm okay with eliminating the lottery. I feel like it was implemented in 80. Was
85.
it after? Was it
Or
after
84.
the Rockets? It was after the Rockets got the 2 number 1s in a row, right?
Well, yeah. So yes, and the Rockets were so egregious in tanking during the Hakeem year that's what the lottery. That's why the lottery existed. And then Ewing was the next year.
I'm not totally opposed to getting rid of the lottery, but I do think that the fact that it's been implemented in other sports leagues like the NHL, I feel like there's definitely it kind of works. I think it's definitely helped some of these really aggressive moves because I think all the NBA could really ask for is that there's no 80s Rockets and that there's no process Sixers. And I don't think we've really had anything quite like them. You can look
Not over
at some
full
teams.
seasons.
You can look at a couple teams and say, hey, like for 1 or maybe 2 years max, they went really hard. Like look at OKC. They only aggressively bottomed out like twice. And
Remember
the
when they were the
highest,
face of tanking? How
and
funny was that?
yeah, and they got the number 6 pick, and then they got the number 2 pick, and that's it. They managed to get like an entire rotation in one draft with selections all through the 2022 draft. So I I'm kind of at the mind where I really don't think the NBA should mess with things anymore because I think it's fine right now. The only thing is I don't really like this new lottery system. I don't like how the Mavs went from, getting they were supposed to get the 12th pick, they got number 1. Like you opened up that type of chaos by evening out the draft odds more. We got to help the teams at the top. Like this is
Well,
I'm more at the mind that okay, a lottery's fine, but I think it's really hurt these bottom dwelling teams the worst.
Well, this is my exact point, right? Like that story that Shams wrote on ESPN, the Utah Jazz were all over it. Well, you know what? The Utah Jazz picked number 5 last year, despite having the worst record. If the NBA just didn't meddle with these new lottery odds and, frankly, the existence of the lottery in the first place, the Jazz would have picked number 1 last year. They would have taken Cooper Flag, and this year they would be too good to tank. Like, that's it. Like, the NBA is making it harder on the worst teams by making it harder for them to get top picks and therefore keeping them at the bottom longer. It's kind of the same for the Wizards. Like, if the Wizards had gotten Cooper Flag, I don't think they would be the worst team in the NBA this year. Would they still be bad? Probably. But if you tell a team that won 10 games, you're only going to pick 6, you're only going to pick 5th, well, how are they supposed to like improve quickly, right? Like, you have to stay multiple years and keep picking 5, 6, 7 in the hope that eventually like you hit on one of those guys and it works out. The Pistons fell from number 1 to number 5 like multiple times, right? Didn't they pick number 5 exactly 3 years in a row?
I think
Something like that.
I think other than the Cade pick, they've only had the 5th pick, I think.
Right. Like, maybe the Pistons could have grown into what they are now if instead of picking 5th, they were picking 1st, 2nd, 3rd, whatever. They could have done this faster. We wouldn't have had to have lived through the embarrassment of the 28 game losing streak, whatever it was. Like, the worst teams need the most help, and the current lottery system deprives them of that help over this faux outrage over tanking. Because, like, how dare a team be intentionally bad? But the Mavericks, making the stupidest fucking trade in NBA history, get rewarded for that. That flies in the face of what Adam Silver said. The goal being to have 30 teams all in the position, if well managed, to compete for a championship. The Dallas Mavericks were not well managed. They were fucking lucky. That's it. That's all they were. It's so freaking stupid to give a team like the Mavericks or the Hawks the year before the number 1 pick. Why even have a draft that relies on the standings if a team can go from the postseason? And yes, the play-in is the postseason, not the playoffs. It is the postseason. That's an important distinction, but they are playing postseason basketball, to picking number 1 overall. That defeats the entire purpose. I just think it's so over the top stupid. I think you got to get rid of the lottery altogether. Make sure that teams like the Jazz, like the Wizards, like the Hornets can get their top picks and start their improvement process. If you need to find ways to make it harder for them to tank in subsequent years, fine. I get that. But let these teams get their franchise guys and start their process. That's what I think needs to happen.
Bring back old lottery odds. That's where I'm at.
Well, you know what the irony of this was? They've changed the lottery odds several times. And the reason that we went to the 25% number 1 system was that the Orlando Magic picked number 1 2 years in a row. Like, they said the odds weren't flat enough because the Magic got Shaq and then they got the Chris Webber pick, which they traded for Penny Hardaway. And there was all this outrage. How could this happen? How could the Magic get that pick twice in a row? We have to give the worst teams more hope. And then we went back. And by the way, like, we're doing this again. It's cyclical. It's like, that just tells me that the lottery is stupid.
I don't mind flat odds with the top 3 teams, but you got to give them more odds, I think. They went from, so the number 1 team had a 25% chance, something like that?
At the peak, yeah. Well, the before we did the 2019 change, it was 25%.
I think it's tough. I think they need a little higher odds. Figuring out that distribution is going to be really tough, but I would definitely increase, if you could at least just improve the odds for the teams at the top and make it like borderline impossible for the teams 10 through 14. That's not what the system intended for. What the Mavs just did, what the Hawks did 2 years ago, like, that was not the intention.
Right. I mean, at that point, I think we can just both agree the system is broken. It's not doing what it's supposed to do when teams in the play-in are getting the number 1 pick. And if that's going to be the case, like, if that's the system that you're creating, I think it's really hypocritical to target teams for tanking. Like, the Jazz wouldn't need to tank if they had Cooper Flag. It's that simple. The reason the Jazz are tanking is because they know that they need to get a player like Cooper Flag, and the current system makes it harder for them to get that player than just a natural NFL-style draft would, in which the worst team gets the number 1 pick. We're in agreement here. I think we mostly just look at this whole situation on the NBA's part as cosmetic. It is them trying to solve a problem that doesn't really exist, and frankly, hurting the worst teams in ways that we disagree with. Is there anything else you want to add, or want to call it from here?
I'm done, Sam. I don't really have anything coming up, but I wish you happy holidays. Enjoy the break. And I'm looking forward to another strong our first full year together strong. We've got some more division previews coming up, and so everyone be on the lookout for that. Sam, what do you got?
Read cbssports.com. I think I'll chime in on the live blog on Christmas if you're around watching games. And then I'm not sure. I'm probably going to take a few days off after Christmas. I don't have anything immediately in the hopper. I have a fun story coming on New Year's Day, but we'll have a couple podcasts between now and then. But yeah, just until then, read CBS Sports, listen to Third Apron. Thank you, everybody, and have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Winter Season.